There's a reason why some men enter a room and immediately change the energy of the place, while others go unnoticed their entire lives. And no, it has nothing to do with money, looks, or status. It has to do with control, emotional control, mental control, strategic control. Machiavelli already understood something that continues to frighten people today. The world doesn't respect emotional innocence. The world respects silent strength, and perhaps that's one of the hardest truths to accept. Because most people have been taught to react impulsively, talk too much, trust too quickly, and seek approval as if it were a virtue. But in the real game of life, those who don't control their own minds end up being controlled by someone who does. Look around. How many men live emotionally exhausted, trapped in anxiety, distraction, emotional dependence, and a constant need for validation? How many give up on their plans too early, explode at the slightest provocation, and waste energy trying to convince people who don't even truly care? Politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires the courage to see the world as it is, not as we would like it to be. And here's the problem. Almost no one can stand this conversation, because it dismantles comfortable illusions. It shows that often the greatest enemy is not outside, it's inside. It's the uncontrolled ego. It's the inability to remain silent. It's the childish need for immediate recognition. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean becoming cruel. It means becoming impossible to manipulate. And that's exactly why this video might unsettle a lot of people. Because you'll understand the silent rules that strategic men use to maintain power, clarity, and control, while most continue living on impulse. Some of these rules will seem cold at first. Others will directly address wounds you may have been trying to hide for years. But if you pay attention until the end, you'll realize something dangerous. The men who seem calmest on the outside usually fight the most intense battles on the inside. And yet, they remain steadfast. Virtue and fortuna favor those who learn to think before reacting, observe before trusting, and build before announcing. So prepare yourself, because after this video, you may never be able to look at yourself and others the same way again. If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. Some people think power is about raising your voice, banging on the table, exploding when contradicted. But curiously, the most dangerous men in history almost never needed to do that. Machiavelli already understood something that few can bear to accept. Whoever loses control of their own emotions puts their own neck in the hands of others. And the worst part is that this happens silently. A snide comment at work, a provocation in an argument, an emotional rejection. That's it. The person reacts impulsively and reveals exactly where they can be manipulated. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, demands composure. It's no use having intelligence if any criticism dismantles your balance. A truly strong man feels anger, fear, anxiety, jealousy. He feels everything. The difference is that he carefully chooses what to show. And that's the game that almost no one notices. Because while many live reacting emotionally to the environment, others use the environment to observe who loses their temper first. It's hard to admit this, but the world respects those who know how to control themselves more than those who are constantly trying to prove something. It's better to be feared than loved, Machiavelli said. But there's an even deeper layer to that. The man who controls himself rarely needs to control others. And honestly, few things are more frightening than someone calm amidst chaos. Notice how people reveal their emotional secrets without realizing it. Some people's moods change completely because of an ignored message. Others become anxious when they don't receive immediate validation. Some can't stay silent for 5 minutes without picking up their cell phones. And all of this reveals invisible weaknesses. Virtue and fortune go hand in hand, but no fortune helps those who are slaves to their own emotions. A practical example? Observe high-level executives, experienced negotiators, or even professional poker players. They rarely show exactly what they are feeling, not because they are cold or heartless, but because they understand that uncontrolled emotion becomes free information for the other side. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve your mental clarity. And this can be trained in everyday life. Before responding to a provocation, wait a few minutes. Before reacting to criticism, ask yourself if it really deserves your energy. Start small. Spend an entire day without justifying your decisions to anyone. Try listening more than speaking in a conversation. It seems simple, but many people despair when they cannot explain, convince, or react immediately. The truth is that those who constantly need to explain themselves have usually already lost some control over the situation. And here's an almost invisible detail that separates ordinary men from strategic men. They understand that emotion is fuel, not a steering wheel. Calculated use of force doesn't mean absence of feeling, it means direction. The disciplined individual takes anger and transforms it into training. They take rejection and transform it into financial growth. They take anxiety and transform it into preparation. Meanwhile, most people pour their emotions onto social media, into pointless arguments, or onto people who don't really care. Decisions based on real human nature require constant self-observation. Sometimes, the greatest enemy isn't the competitor, the traitor, or the environment. It's the inability to remain silent when the ego is hurt. And look how curious. The more emotionally controlled someone becomes, the less need they feel to impress others. They stop reacting to every cheap provocation. They stop desperately seeking approval. They stop trying to win pointless arguments. And that's precisely where a different presence begins to emerge. A presence that doesn't need to shout to be noticed. Because sooner or later, those who learn to control what they feel also begin to understand the value of controlling what they reveal. And almost no one is prepared to understand the power that exists in the silence of someone who observes more than they speak. There's a reason why intelligent men speak less as they mature. It's not shyness, it's not insecurity, it's strategy. Machiavelli understood that every word spoken out of turn is an open door for interpretation, attack, or manipulation. And most people relinquish power without realizing it, precisely because they feel a compulsive need to fill the silence. Notice a common conversation. Someone barely listens and already interrupts, trying to prove their worth, boast, or show off their knowledge. But while one talks too much, the other gathers information. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands this uncomfortable perception. Whoever controls the pace of the conversation usually also controls its emotional direction. Silence creates tension, it creates mystery, it creates authority. And this deeply bothers those who depend on constant validation. Better to be feared than loved often begins with something extremely simple, not reacting immediately. The person who answers everything instantly becomes predictable. The silent man, on the other hand, forces others to project intentions, doubts, and even respect onto him. And it's curious how human beings fear what they cannot fully decipher. After all, every word reveals a card, and the most strategic men rarely show their whole deck. Observe truly influential leaders. Many of them take long pauses before answering difficult questions, not because they don't know what to say, but because they understand the psychological weight of calm. A desperate man tries to fill every second. A conscious man chooses each phrase as one moves pieces on a chessboard. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve position, clarity, and emotional advantage. A practical example of this can be applied immediately. In a discussion, try listening to the end without interrupting. Just observe. People reveal much more when they feel they are in control of the conversation. Another powerful exercise is to drastically reduce the need to explain your plans, feelings, or decisions. Not everyone deserves access to your inner world. And here's a truth that few can bear. The more you talk about your goals too early, the more energy you lose trying to sustain external expectations. Virtù and fortuna favor those who know how to build in silence. That's why so many men fail before they even begin. They announce everything. They show everything. They validate everything. They want premature applause. Meanwhile, the truly dangerous ones are working quietly, far from the childish need for approval. And honestly, the world rarely sees someone who has learned to move without making a sound. There's also a brutal psychological detail in all of this. Silence forces people to confront themselves, and few can endure that. That's why many people talk non-stop, consume content all the time, or live surrounded by noise. Silence exposes hidden insecurities. Your own loyal armies aren't built in chaotic minds. A man who can't be alone with his own thoughts will hardly dominate any external environment. Calculated use of force also means knowing when not to respond, knowing when to ignore minor provocations, knowing when to let the other person wear themselves down alone. This isn't weakness, it's applied emotional intelligence. And see how this even appears in financial negotiations. Whoever speaks first often loses an advantage. Whoever endures silence generally receives more information. Constant adaptability requires this almost invisible ability to observe without haste. Because silence doesn't just serve to hide intentions, it serves to reveal the intentions of others. The quieter someone remains, the more they perceive micro-expressions, inconsistencies, insecurities, and masks. And it is precisely at this point that many begin to understand something dangerous. Perhaps true power has never been in fine words, but in the ability to conceal the next move while everyone else continues to talk too much. There's a stark difference between men who dream and men who build. The former announce everything, the latter appear ready-made, and this completely changes how the world reacts to them. Machiavelli understood that revealing intentions too early weakens any strategy. Because the moment you expose your plans, you automatically activate opinions, envy, sabotage, judgment, and external expectations. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands discretion. The average person feels the need to announce that they're going to open a business, start a gym, invest money, or change their life. It seems innocent, but often this is just neediness disguised as enthusiasm. They seek validation before achieving results. And the problem is that premature applause is addictive. The brain receives dopamine just from talking about the plan, without actually having to execute it. Meanwhile, strategic men work in the shadows. They understand that energy dispersed in explanations weakens execution. Better to be feared than loved also means being unpredictable, because the predictable man becomes an easy target. But the one who acts silently creates an impact before the environment has time to react. And honestly, almost no one can stop what they didn't see coming. Notice how the greatest transformations often happen in silence. The person disappears for a few months and returns financially, physically, or mentally different. While many were busy talking, he was building. The end justifies the means when the goal is to protect your progress from unnecessary distractions. A practical example of this is to stop sharing goals with just anyone. Want to start a project? Start it. Want to invest? Invest first, talk later. Want to improve your body? Train quietly for 6 months before posting a single photo. Virtù and fortuna favor those who endure the discomfort of growing without immediate recognition. And that's rare these days. Social media has turned many people into experts at appearing productive without producing anything real. People film books they haven't read, cars they haven't bought, routines they don't maintain. The appearance of virtue has replaced true depth, and then an almost cruel detail of human nature emerges. The more you talk about something big you intend to do, the more invisible resistance begins to arise around you. Some disbelieve, others project insecurities, others simply want to see you fail to confirm their own limitations. That's why intelligent men learn early on that strategic protection is also a form of survival. But there's an even deeper layer to all this. The man who reveals little begins to develop something extremely rare: presence, because when no one knows exactly what he's building, every move gains psychological weight. Calculated use of force means understanding that surprise is an advantage. Great negotiators use this, great entrepreneurs use this, great leaders use this. Decisions based on real human nature require understanding that the world reacts differently to a ready-made result than to an empty promise. And look how this even appears in personal relationships. There are people who talk so much about what they intend to do that they end up creating an identity based on discourse, not action. Little by little, they lose credibility even with themselves. The silent man, on the other hand, creates inner confidence because he learns to depend less on external approval. He stops looking for witnesses for every step. He stops needing to convince others that he will win. His own loyal armies begin first within his own mind, and perhaps that's exactly why truly dangerous people rarely announce changes. They simply disappear for a while. And when they return, the entire environment realizes that something has happened. But then it's too late to try to stop it. And those who learn this inevitably begin to realize something else. It's not enough to hide movements. It's also necessary to carefully choose the environment where these movements will be constructed. Few people realize it, but the environment almost always wins over willpower. A person may have discipline, intelligence, ambition, but if surrounded by distraction, mediocrity, and chaos, sooner or later they begin to absorb it without noticing. Machiavelli deeply understood the impact of the invisible influence around someone. His own loyal armies were not just soldiers. They were structures capable of protecting the ruler's mind against internal corruption and external weakness. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands recognizing an uncomfortable truth. You inevitably become what you tolerate daily. Pay attention to the conversations around you. Some people only talk about gossip, problems, crisis, celebrity, betrayal, debt, or complaints. Others talk about building, strategy, opportunity, growth, and solutions. It seems like a small detail, but these conversations slowly shape your perception of the world. And therein lies the danger. Because those who live immersed in negativity begin to see limits in everything. Those who live surrounded by superficiality lose depth without realizing it. Better to be feared than loved often begins by carefully choosing who has access to your mental energy. After all, no one builds greatness while living permanently distracted. Look at truly disciplined men, and you'll notice a curious pattern. They protect their environment almost like someone guarding a safe. The end justifies the means when the goal is to preserve mental clarity. This means filtering people, content, habits, and even physical places. An extremely practical example? Look at your cell phone. How many accounts you follow truly strengthen your mind? How many only stimulate comparison, anxiety, or cheap dopamine? A strategic man doesn't let just any content into his head. Constant adaptability also means adapting the environment to favor growth. Want to develop focus? Turn off notifications on your phone. Want to improve financially? Spend more time listening to investors, entrepreneurs, and disciplined people. Books like The Law of Success by Napoleon Hill, The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene, and Meditations by Marcus Aurelius help precisely because they reorganize how the mind interprets the world. And here's something brutal. Some friendships don't directly destroy you. They just silently delay your evolution. Complacent people often ridicule any attempt at change because your discipline exposes their lack of it. Virtue and fortune favor those who endure the temporary solitude necessary for growth. There is also an invisible environment that almost no one controls, the emotional environment. Some people spend the whole day absorbing other people's chaos, other people's problems, other people's dramas, other people's opinions. And at the end of the week, they are mentally exhausted without even understanding why. Calculated use of force includes protecting one's own peace as a strategic priority. Decisions based on real human nature require understanding that emotions are contagious. Anxiety is contagious, laziness is contagious, ambition is too, clarity is too. And see how this appears even in simple places. A messy room often produces a messy mind. A disorganized routine creates disorganized emotions. A man who does not govern his own environment will hardly govern anything else in life. The appearance of virtue does not sustain true growth when daily life is dominated by chaos. That is why intelligent men learn to create spaces that favor silence, reading, training, strategy, and reflection. They understand that protecting the environment is protecting the future. And when someone finally begins to control what enters their own mind, they inevitably start to see something else more clearly. The people around them cease to be seen for what they promise and begin to be perceived for who they really are. One of the greatest causes of human suffering is simple to understand, but difficult to accept. People see others as they would like them to be, not as they really are. And this destroys friendships, relationships, businesses, and even entire families. Machiavelli observed human nature without romanticism. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, means abandoning emotional naivete without becoming a bitter man. Because there is a difference between clarity and cynicism. The strategic man does not hate people. He simply learns to observe them accurately. Notice how many people promise loyalty when they need you, but disappear when the benefit ceases to exist. Others speak beautifully, demonstrate an appearance of virtue, but repeat the same destructive patterns for years. And there lies a brutal detail. Words evoke emotion. Patterns reveal. Better to be feared than loved also involves not depending emotionally on the validation of others, because those who desperately need to be accepted often ignore obvious signs of manipulation, falsehood, or self-interest. And honestly, most men don't suffer because they trust too much. They suffer because they insist on ignoring what they have already perceived deep down. Observe repeated actions, not intense speeches. The end justifies the means when the goal is to protect your peace of mind and future decisions. An extremely common example occurs in personal relationships. Someone constantly lies about small things, but the person in love prefers to believe the emotionally comfortable version of the situation. Another example appears in the professional environment. The colleague talks about partnership, joint growth, and loyalty, but always disappears in difficult times. Virtù and fortuna favor those who learn early on to interpret behavior without excessive emotional filters. And this doesn't mean living in distrust of everyone. It simply means paying attention. Someone who treats waiters badly will probably treat you badly when they lose interest. Someone who speaks ill of everyone behind their back will do the same to you. Someone who constantly blames the whole world rarely takes responsibility for their own failures. Decisions based on real human nature require observing coherence between words and actions. And here's something powerful. Emotionally mature people aren't just impressed by charisma. They analyze consistency, because charisma without character can be one of the most dangerous traps that exist. Interestingly, the most effective manipulators almost always know exactly what to say to appear trustworthy. But there's an even deeper layer to all of this. The man who learns to see people clearly also begins to see himself more honestly. Calculated use of strength includes recognizing one's own emotional weaknesses, needs, and illusions. After all, many times we are not only deceived by others, we are deceived by the desire to believe in something convenient. Our own loyal armies begin with the ability to protect our own minds against self-deception, and see how this completely changes the way we live. The lucid man stops desperately clinging to idealized versions of people. He stops trying to save those who don't want to change. He stops negotiating his values for fear of losing companionship. Constant adaptability requires the courage to accept uncomfortable truths quickly. Because the sooner someone sees reality, the less time they waste in empty environments, relationships, and promises. And perhaps that's exactly why strong men seem more selective as they mature. They understand that trust is built slowly, observation is worth more than excitement, and emotional clarity saves years of unnecessary suffering. But when someone finally learns to see others without illusions, they inevitably also begin to face another inescapable truth. Much of their own strength is born precisely from the pain they tried to avoid throughout their lives. The average man does everything to escape pain. The strong man learns from it, and this difference changes entire destinies. Machiavelli understood something that few people can accept without resistance. Inevitable suffering can destroy someone or refine them. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires abandoning the fantasy that true growth only happens in comfortable moments. It doesn't. Almost every profound transformation is born from losses, failures, rejections, silent humiliations, or periods of solitude that no one sees. And it's curious how the modern world sells distraction as a solution for everything. Suffered, consume, empty, scroll endlessly, lost, seek quick dopamine. But ignored pain doesn't disappear. It only hides and returns later, usually stronger. Better to be feared than loved also begins with the ability to endure discomfort without emotionally collapsing. Because emotionally fragile men become easily manipulated. A compliment controls them. A rejection destroys them. But the man who has consciously endured suffering develops something rare: depth. He stops panicking in the face of difficulties because he understands that almost everything in life is temporary. And honestly, few things generate more strength than surviving what previously seemed impossible to endure. Notice how some of the wisest people carry a different kind of calm in their gaze. It's not naivete, it's emotional experience. The end justifies the means when the goal is to transform suffering into clarity, not bitterness. A disciplined man uses pain as strategic fuel. Betrayed? Learn to observe better. Rejected? Learn to strengthen your own self-worth. Lost money? Learn new skills. Virtù and Fortuna favor those who don't waste suffering. And here's an extremely powerful practice: writing. It seems too simple, but putting emotions on paper helps transform emotional chaos into rational understanding. Many men spend years trying to escape feelings that could teach them exactly what they need to learn. Books like Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl show how even the most brutal suffering can generate purpose when interpreted correctly. Another practical example is physical training. The gym doesn't just strengthen muscles, it strengthens tolerance to discomfort. The individual slowly learns that growth requires tension, it requires repetition, it requires endurance. The calculated use of strength also means choosing useful pain instead of suffering eternally from the same weaknesses, because all life will involve suffering, but not all suffering leads to evolution. There is also a cruel truth that almost no one speaks clearly about. Pain reveals who you really are. While everything is comfortable, anyone seems strong, kind, or disciplined. But when the pressure arrives, the essence appears. Decisions based on true human nature require observing how someone reacts during difficult times, and this applies even to oneself. Your own loyal armies begin when a person stops running from their own inner abysses. They face traumas, insecurities, emotional addictions, and destructive patterns without constant anesthesia. Constant adaptability is born precisely from this ability to navigate painful changes without losing direction. And see how this completely transforms someone's presence. The person who has faced true pain is rarely impressed by small problems. Minor provocations cease to matter. Small delays cease to generate despair. They understand that life doesn't reward those who complain the most. It rewards those who endure the longest without giving up. An appearance of virtue doesn't sustain anyone during real storms. Only strength built silently remains. And perhaps that's exactly where many begin to realize something uncomfortable. After learning to use pain as a teacher, an even more delicate concern arises. Protecting what was built with so much suffering from the judgment, envy, and destruction caused by others. A man can lose money, status, opportunities, and even position. But when he loses his reputation, he also loses an invisible part of his own power. And the problem is that many only realize this too late. Machiavelli deeply understood the value of public image. Not cheap falsehood, but strategic perception. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding that the world reacts much more to what it believes about you than to what you feel internally. And this may seem uncomfortable, but it's true. Trustworthy people receive opportunities even before they ask. Disciplined people inspire silent respect. Inconsistent people, on the other hand, begin to lose influence without even realizing it. An appearance of virtue doesn't mean pretending to be perfect. It means understanding that your presence communicates something all the time. The way you speak, the way you arrive, the way you keep promises, the way you react under pressure. Everything builds reputation. Better to be feared than loved often simply means being someone whose word carries weight. Because deep down, nobody deeply respects someone unpredictable, uncontrolled, or inconsistent. And honestly, most people destroy their own reputation trying to impress people who don't really matter. Notice how strong men rarely need to say they are strong. Their behavior communicates more than their words. The end justifies the means when the goal is to build solid credibility over the years. A simple example of this is punctuality. It seems like a small detail, but disciplined men understand that constant lateness communicates mental disorganization. Another example is exaggerated promises. Intelligent people promise less and deliver more. Virtù and fortuna favor those who build trust slowly, like someone building a fortress stone by stone. And here is an extremely important point. Reputation is not built only in the face of great moments. It is born mainly from small, invisible habits. Keeping your word, responding clearly, not speaking ill of everyone behind their backs, not completely changing your character depending on who is present. Books like The 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene show how public perception influences social and professional power much more than most people imagine. Calculated use of force also means protecting your name from chaotic environments, unnecessary scandals, and people who live surrounded by drama. Because sooner or later the environment begins to contaminate the perception that others have of you as well. But there's an even deeper layer to all of this. The man who builds a solid reputation slowly begins to build self-confidence. His own loyal armies emerge first from internal consistency. After all, how can someone lead others if they don't even trust their own word? Decisions based on true human nature require understanding that reputation functions like an invisible currency. Some doors open silently because of it. Some opportunities disappear silently due to its absence. And see how this even appears in personal relationships. Emotionally unstable men create insecure environments around them. Consistent men, on the other hand, transmit stability without needing to say anything. Constant adaptability doesn't mean changing values according to convenience. It means evolving without losing strategic integrity. Because in the end, true reputation isn't marketing, it's repetition. It's what people consistently begin to expect from you. And perhaps that's exactly why intelligent men protect their image so much. They know that rebuilding trust takes years, while destroying it can take minutes. But there's something even more powerful than external reputation. The moment a man stops depending emotionally on others to feel complete. And that's where a freedom begins that few people truly experience. There's a silent difference between loving someone and being emotionally dependent on that person for your existence. And almost no one teaches this clearly. Machiavelli understood that excessive dependence always creates vulnerability. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands recognizing an uncomfortable truth. The more desperately someone needs external validation, presence, or approval, the more easily they can be manipulated. The emotionally dependent man begins to negotiate values, tolerate disrespect, and abandon his own dignity just to avoid being alone. And the most dangerous thing is that this rarely starts, obviously. Small concessions become emotional habits. Little by little, the individual loses mental autonomy without realizing it. Better to be feared than loved also means never completely surrendering control of one's own emotional stability to another person. Because human beings change, circumstances change, relationships change, and strong men understand that healthy love is born from abundance, not desperation. They choose companionship, but they don't beg for it. This isn't coldness, it's emotional maturity, and honestly, few things generate more respect than someone who knows how to walk alone without losing their own essence. Notice how emotionally needy people live in a constant state of anxiety. A message takes a while to arrive, and they immediately imagine abandonment. A change in behavior occurs, and they immediately fall into internal despair. The end justifies the means when the goal is to recover true emotional freedom. Virtue and Fortuna favor men who build such a solid internal life that relationships cease to be an emotional escape and become a conscious choice. And here's a powerful detail. Self-sufficiency doesn't mean absolute isolation. It means the ability to remain whole even when someone leaves. An extremely practical example of this is building your own pillars outside of relationships. Physical training, reading, work, spirituality, financial skills, personal projects, loyal friends. Your own loyal armies aren't just the people around you. They are internal structures that prevent someone from emotionally collapsing in the face of loss. Books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius help precisely because they teach emotional independence in the face of external chaos. Another brutally efficient exercise is learning to spend time alone without immediately escaping to distractions. No music, no social media, no constant need for stimulation. Because many discover something frightening in this silence. They never truly learn to enjoy their own company. But there's an even deeper layer to all of this. The man who learns not to depend emotionally on others becomes extremely difficult to control. Calculated use of force includes protecting one's own emotional peace from invisible manipulations. Decisions based on real human nature require understanding that desperate people accept almost anything to avoid feeling abandoned. And that's exactly where toxic relationships, abusive environments, and destructive emotional cycles arise. Constant adaptability is born when someone realizes that losing people is part of life, but losing oneself shouldn't be. And see how this completely changes a man's presence. He stops chasing after those who show disinterest. He stops begging for attention. He stops molding his personality just to please others. The appearance of virtue ceases to matter so much because he finally builds real inner value. Curiously, the less someone desperately needs to be loved, the more magnetic their presence becomes, because emotional freedom transmits silent strength. And perhaps that's exactly where many begin to realize something almost paradoxical. True power doesn't lie in controlling people. It lies in building such a solid life that time is no longer spent seeking immediate approval, but is instead invested in a much larger vision, patiently built over the years. Most people destroy their own future because they can't stand waiting. They want quick results, quick money, quick recognition, quick pleasure. And that's exactly where they lose the game without realizing it. Machiavelli understood that true power almost never arises from haste. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, requires accepting an extremely uncomfortable truth. Great results often seem invisible at the beginning. While many seek emotional shortcuts, strategic men silently build advantages compounded over the years. And this requires a rare quality nowadays: disciplined patience. Better to be feared than loved also means not being controlled by the emotional urgency of the moment. Because impulsive men make desperate decisions. They sell too early. They give up too early. They explode too early. Relationships end because of impulsiveness. Companies fail because of impulsiveness. Entire lives crumble because of an inability to endure slow processes. And honestly, the modern world has trained people to hate time. Everything is immediate. Everything needs to happen now. But almost everything that is truly valuable requires silent repetition for far longer than most people are willing to endure. Notice how real wealth, a strong physique, a solid reputation, and emotional intelligence rarely arise from quick bursts of energy. The end justifies the means when the goal is to build something that survives the test of time. Virtue and fortune favor consistent men, not just motivated ones. An extremely clear example of this appears in investments. Those who understand compound interest perceive something almost magical. Small movements, repeated over many years, create absurd results. Warren Buffett built his fortune precisely by understanding the power of patience. The same happens with the body. Training for a week changes nothing. Training for 5 years completely changes a life. Your own loyal armies are also built slowly. True trust takes time. Authority takes time. Respect takes time. Books like The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham and Mastery by Robert Greene show exactly this. The world's greatest winners have developed an almost abnormal capacity to endure long processes without abandoning direction. Calculated use of force includes knowing where to continuously apply energy, even without immediate reward. And here lies a brutal truth. Many people abandon something extraordinary because the initial progress seemed too small. They don't understand that compound growth seems slow until it becomes impossible to ignore. But there's an even deeper layer to all of this. The man who learns to think in decades begins to live completely differently from the crowd. Decisions based on real human nature require realizing that most are trapped in short-term emotional needs, immediate pleasure, immediate status, immediate validation. Meanwhile, strategic men make silent moves that may only yield full results years later. Constant adaptability means enduring phases where no one understands your vision, and this requires absurd psychological strength, because there will be times when it seems like nothing is working, no applause, no recognition, no visible reward, just silent repetition. The appearance of virtue doesn't sustain anyone at this stage, only real discipline remains, and perhaps that's exactly why so few go far. They want to harvest before planting deeply. They want respect before developing competence. They want freedom before building structure. The patient man, on the other hand, understands that time is a weapon. He stops desperately chasing instant results and begins to build something almost impossible to destroy. Because while most live reacting to the present, he is silently shaping the future. And when the results finally appear, they seem like luck to those who never saw the invisible years of silent construction that came before. Ultimately, almost no one loses their life all at once. People lose in silence. They lose when they let emotions control decisions. They lose when they talk too much, overreact, depend too much, and think only of immediate pleasure. And perhaps this is the most uncomfortable truth of all. Many men are not destroyed by external enemies. They are destroyed by their own lack of inner control. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. Politics, guided by reality, not by ideals, was never about gratuitous cruelty. It was about seeing the world without emotional illusions. Because the man who masters himself completely changes the way he goes through life. He stops begging for respect and begins to silently inspire it. He stops chasing validation and begins to build real value. He stops reacting to every provocation and begins to carefully choose where he puts his energy. Now the question is, which of these rules affected you most deeply? In which one did you realize you are still emotionally vulnerable? Perhaps it's in the silence. Perhaps it's in the difficulty of controlling impulses. Perhaps it's in emotional dependence. Or perhaps it's in the inability to think long-term while the whole world tries to push you towards immediate gratification. The fact is simple. Nobody builds true power living on autopilot. Calculated use of force requires awareness. It requires discipline. It requires the courage to abandon weak versions of yourself. And honestly, most will never do that. Because growing hurts, changing hurts, facing your own truth hurts. But continuing to live without control costs even more. So don't just watch this video for entertainment, apply it. Observe your emotions in the coming days. Speak less, reveal less. Better control your environment. Stop ignoring patterns in people. Start building a solid reputation. Learn to be alone without falling apart. And above all, stop thinking like someone desperate for quick results. Virtue and fortuna favor patient, strategic, and emotionally unwavering men. Now tell me in the comments, which of these rules do you believe most modern men are incapable of following? And which one will you start applying today? If this video opened your mind in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because here, you don't just learn cheap motivation. You learn how truly strong men think, act, and position themselves in a world that tries to weaken them every day.